Thanks. Buenas tardes. I'm trying to say that quickly because I was told that the faster I say it, the more natural I sound. As you may have heard already, yesterday the director of the CIA, David Petraeus, resigned his post, citing an extramarital affair. It's as if we can't go a week in America without some public man or another being felled by another sexual scandal. There are several ways to look at Petraeus' situation. A neurobiologist might say that powerful people, whether male or female, are prone to cheating. An evolutionary anthropologist might argue that monogamy is an unnatural social arrangement. A sociologist might point out that Petraeus, who is 60, is yet another casualty of the gray divorce revolution, in which divorce rates among those over 50 years old have doubled in the past 2 decades. No matter what tack you take, all evidence points in the same direction. The institution of marriage is undergoing a radical transformation. Some call it a marriage crisis. That's one way of looking at it. Another is to acknowledge that this sea change has been going on for the last 40 years, and that finally, after centuries of bowing to social convention, people are making their own decisions about matters of the heart rather than letting society make those decisions for them. For an optimist like myself, it's tempting to say that the old, outmoded ways of doing things are being replaced by new and better ways. Certainly, gay marriage is an example of this. I'm incredibly happy to report that as of last week, gay marriage is now legal in 9 states, plus Washington, D.C. Yeah. But here's what's interesting. In many cases, the old ways of doing things are being replaced by even older ways of doing things. Or to put it differently, we are progressing into the past. Take what are traditionally considered to be the 5 milestones of adulthood: completing school, leaving home, becoming financially independent, marrying, having a child. In 1960, the vast majority of 30-year-olds had achieved adulthood according to this metric. Today, fewer than half of women have, and among men, that number drops to 1/3. So let's look at it step by step. 1, education. In North America, more people finish high school and go on to college than ever before, but this is a very recent development. It wasn't until the 1970s, as society began to shift from a manufacturing base to service and technology, that college became a populist pursuit. Meanwhile, there's a radical gender shift on college campuses, with women outperforming men across the board. Among men, college rates might soon revert to what they were before the 1950s. 2, home ownership. The idea that owning a home is the pinnacle of maturity is also a new notion. Until the 1950s, it was common for married couples to live with their families to save money before striking out, and the recession is seeing us repeat those patterns. Across the nation, recent college graduates and middle-aged professionals are moving back in with their families, and unmarried adults are choosing to live together to share expenses. In a recent study, only 12% of people between the ages of 18 and 34 said that owning a home was important to them. 3 is financial independence, and let's just say that it's taking a lot longer to get there. And women are fast on the heels of men. Female earnings have grown 44% since 1970, and in some metropolitan areas, women are actually out-earning their male peers. 4 is marriage. In stark contrast to the baby boomers, half of whom were married by their mid-20s, younger Americans today are waiting as late as their mid-30s to tie the knot. The more educated a person is, the longer she waits. Meanwhile, younger Americans are marrying less frequently. Today, only 22% of Generation X is married. 5, and finally, is children. And childbearing is changing as well. Today, 40% of all children are born to single mothers. And since 1976, the percentage of women in their early 40s who have not given birth has doubled. All of these changes have significant ramifications. Most fascinating to me is how quickly we are breaking away from the dominance of couple culture and the nuclear family, a change that, in my opinion, is long in coming. 10 years ago, I ended a long-term relationship and decided to try being alone for a while. What I discovered appalled me. Back then, being a single woman meant being desperately unmarried, like Bridget Jones, or the romantic adventuress that is Carrie Bradshaw, which is to say, a single woman was in a constant state of trying to become unsingle. I wasn't opposed to spending time with men, but the whole point of this experiment was to not be someone's girlfriend for a while. Instead, I quickly learned that the entire social existence of an urban single adult revolves around dating, which is essentially a minefield of miscommunication that overtakes your psychology. Your self-worth becomes entirely bound up in whether or not the opposite sex finds you attractive. You spend all your free time dissecting with friends the merits of different suitors, analyzing his texts and emails, trying to figure out what he meant when he wrote this or that. Far from being romantic, urban dating is a thicket of confused expectations that seem to thwart happiness and even drive women and men further apart. Once a romantic relationship is by some miracle attained, it's freighted with expectations that are impossible for any one person to meet. I was appalled, and I was also addicted, because along with being soul-sucking, this obsession with dating is a very effective way to distract yourself from more difficult matters, not to mention loneliness. But experiencing loneliness is a fact of life, whether or not you're in a relationship. It's something that needs to be understood, not fled from. Odds are most young adults are going to spend at least 8 years on their own before they get married, and probably longer. Are they going to spend this entire elongated chapter escaping into the myth of romance in the frenetic pursuit of a one true love that will right all wrongs, soothe all wounds, and make all that is insecure feel stable? Or is it possible for us to recast what's now known as middle adulthood as a time when career advancement and uncommitted but respectful romantic relationships coexist harmoniously, reestablishing a mode of healthy American individualism that doesn't lean on romance as its panacea? With the idea in mind of progressing toward the past, I looked to history for moments in time when the pursuit of love was a little more self-reflective and dignified. I struck gold with the small subset of bohemians living in New York City's Greenwich Village in the early 1900s. For 15 or so brief, shining years, these brave utopians experimented with free love and companionate marriages in which men and women were equal partners, not opponents. And then came the war and the Depression and another war, and all that radical thinking went back underground. But the sea change taking place over the last 40 years has brought their antiquated ideas back to life. The companionate marriage has been the dominant model since the 1970s women's revolution. More recently, the popular sex columnist Dan Savage advocates for what he calls the monogamish marriage, in which both parties are committed but also free to occasionally stray. Non-traditional marriages or arrangements of any kind are not for everyone, but expanding the cultural conversation to allow for new and different approaches to loving is crucial to the health of our romantic relationships and our sense of self. Which brings us back, finally, to those so-called 5 milestones of adulthood. Perhaps soon enough we'll be able to do away with such notions altogether and think of our lifespans in their entirety, from birth to death, or even, according to some of yesterday's speakers, from in utero to death, in which different milestones can happen at different times, rather than in a specific agreed-upon order. All this takes is a shift in thinking, because the fact is we're living this way already. Thanks a lot.